started?
If you have a question for Dr. Donna, please do leave it on my page and I will be happy to answer the question for you. Hi, welcome to Talking with Dr. Donna. It's Thursday. That means it's time for your appointment with your doctor. So thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Talking with Dr. Donna. My mission is to build generational health. Just as we talk about building generational wealth, we're going to talk about and build generational health. That means that right now where you are, you're going to start creating a new story of health for you and your family. Today's episode, we are talking about sex. Oh my gosh, I know I said it. Why and how is your sex life? And what does that have to do with generational health? Well, you are going to find out, because the way that we're talking about sex and relationships and intimacy is really built on the foundations of racism. And what we're hoping that by the end of the time that you have spent with us today, we are hoping that you will at least start the process of thinking about any body trauma, body shame that your parents or grandparents may have had, and how that may have impacted you and how you think about sex, how you think about relationships, and how you think about intimacy. So sit back and enjoy the episode today, because we're going to talk about it live and open. Also, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them into the chat. And I'm going to be monitoring the chat line and hoping that you have some questions for Dr. Renee, and we will answer them while we are live on the air. All right, so let me bring in my guest today. My guest is Dr. Renee Hillard, who is my dear friend. She is an OBGYN, which is an obstetrics and gynecologic doctor. Hi, Dr. Renee. We worked together in San Ramon for many years. She was a practicing OBGYN for over 20 years. And then moved into a private practice. And her online practice she is an intimacy and relationship coach. That sounds pretty interesting, right? Like, what is that? Dr. Renee is going to tell us all about it. Also, she's certified in somatic coaching. So what do those things have to do with health, relationships, intimacy, coaching? We're going to talk about that tonight. So I don't see Dr. Renee on anymore. So Dr. Renee, there you go. All right, we see you, Dr. Renee. Awesome. All right, can we hear Dr. Renee? All right, hi Kimberly, hi Cherise, hi Vanessa, I see you on. If you have any questions, go ahead and write them in the chat as we're having our conversations, and I will try to get to them and ask Dr. Renee your questions. All right, Dr. Renee, can you hear us?
Yes.
All right, we can hear you. All right, great. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to get from, be a practicing OBGYN to now doing intimacy and relationship coaching.
Yeah, so it has been quite a journey, and it wasn't expected. It wasn't, like I set out to be where I am today. But I've been a sex educator for actually 25 years. So before I was even a doctor, I was a sex educator. And I loved OBGYN because there is a lot of sex education going on in that field. And I would see a lot of women that would come in that were feeling shameful about their bodies, shameful about sex. Even, when they contracted a sexually transmitted infection or something, there was this deep shame that was going on with them. And then also with their changing bodies. So after having kids, they were, embarrassed to have their their partner see their body again after having kids. A lot of times going through menopause, they were embarrassed about the changes that were going on with their body. And I would do education with people and try to, make them comfortable with their bodies, going through these things, and trying to erase the shame around all the changes that happen in our lives and in our bodies. But I would see people suffering with their sexuality, and I would help them, try to both change their mindset about it. A lot of times people came from homes where there was a lot of religious conditioning or shaming around sexuality, or they had picked up shaming in society just from, shaming women about sexuality. And they really struggled a lot with it. And sometimes it would cause problems with their relationships. They would ruin their relationships just because they weren't comfortable having sex. And so, through the years, I educated myself on how to best help these people. And I grew up in this culture too. So there's, things that I took on as far as the conditioning goes with, good girls don't do this, and, you're supposed to wait until marriage. I didn't get married till I was 48. So, that would have been pretty hard for me to wait until I was 48 to have sex. And some people do that, but I didn't want to do that. But then there was a slight shame around sexual behavior because I grew up, in a culture where, good girls are supposed to, keep their legs shut and those kinds of things. And even though I didn't necessarily believe that 100%, it still impacts you. So what happened most recently was in the last few years, I moved to a wellness clinic. So it was a much slower pace of seeing patients. So I would have an hour with a patient. We would get really deep into their sexual issues. And some of it was around menopause. So, that sex wasn't comfortable. And most women were coming to me to make things comfortable enough to please their partner. And it struck me that, it was so rare that somebody would come and want more pleasure for themselves. It was always about get my body well enough so that he can have fun with my body. And I was kind of struck by that. And I said, this is a shame that women are really carrying that our bodies are to please somebody else, or even things like, suggesting things about, touching themselves. Patients would freak out and say, oh, I could never touch my body. And it occurred to me that there's a lot of conditioning around our sexual organs. And I wanted to be able to help people with that. So that's when I went and started looking for programs that could help me help my patients better. And also, help me decondition my own mind about some of the things that I had picked up. And that's when I found this somatic coaching program. And it was wonderful as far as illuminating all the different things that we take on, and helping me unwind it in myself and then help others too. So
right, that's awesome. Now I have to take a break here and say something, because many of you are coming because you know me from being a first lady of a church. And so when we talk about religion and we talk about what we teach in religion, most of my people in the congregation will know that I'm very open, and I have always been since coming, to talk about sex and to talk about safer sex for our young people, recognizing, because I see the opposite end, right? As a pediatrician, I see the teenagers, coming in who are having sex and not telling people and not asking questions because they're afraid to talk to family members because they're not supposed to be having sex based on what we're teaching. But we have to live in reality, and I'm always living in reality. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there for anyone who's saying, Dr. Donna's a first lady and you're talking about sex. Yes, we are, because teen pregnancies are not happening by immaculate conception, okay? They're happening because our teens are having sex, our young adults are having sex. And so what we want to do today is to really talk about these issues and talk about how we talk about sex with our young girls, right, with our girls, and how that leads to having some of these same issues around shaming and the pleasure because of what we're taught as a child. So again, this is building our generational health. You have to know your body, you have to love your body, and you have to love yourself and be able to take care of yourself in order to build generational health. So, had to put that disclaimer in because I know some people might be looking at me a little crazy, but y'all know, True Vine, you guys already know how Dr. Donna rolls. We roll straight and shoot from the hip, right? Okay, so I want to talk to you a little bit about what does somatic coaching mean? Like, what do you do? What is it?
Yeah. So it can be done in many different ways, but the way that I really relate to it is that we're looking at not only, the thoughts and beliefs that people have around sexuality, but the body actually stores tension related to both sexual trauma or conditioning. So, if you think about when somebody or when they show a sex scene in a movie, you tense up, especially if your parents are in the room, you like, contract. And unless you release that tension, the body holds on to that tension. So the body has memory to it around different things, different traumas, but especially around sexual trauma. And if you look at Black communities, 60% of girls and women have sexual abuse in their history. So it's very prevalent in our communities. And boys, it's, the conservative estimates are that 1 in 6 boys are molested. It's probably higher than that because it's way underreported because there's a lot of shame carried around that. So if you have a partnership, it could be as high as 75% of couples, one or both partners has had some kind of sexual abuse in their past. And that's stored in the body. So it can do things like cause contraction in the pelvis where it makes it difficult to access pleasure or to feel anything. So a lot of people say, I'm just not that interested in sex because I feel numb. I feel numbed out. Or it can actually cause, if it's there long enough, it can start to cause disease. So the way I think of it is that dis-ease in the body leads to disease wherever you hold that tension. So, so that's one thing that I want to unwind for people is carrying all that tension in the body. It really leads to disease. If you think about it, most diseases get worse or are caused by stress, both, cardiovascular diseases, immune diseases like cancers, all those kinds of things are impacted by stress. And a lot of stress can be caused by sexual trauma or just physical trauma. Abuse is very prevalent in the Black community. So those things cause a lot of tension in the body. And with my coaching, I can help people unwind that tension in the body. So it's really mind, body, spirit, and repairing some of the wounds around religion and sex. So we get the message that the body's a temple, but not that part of the body. It's the sexual center is considered excluded outside of the temple, but it really is that the whole body is a temple, and we should learn to love all of our bodies, and including our sex organs. In fact, the only reason why we're here is because people had sex. All of our ancestors had sex, or else we wouldn't be here. And I'm not saying that people should make any choice that's outside of their value system or anything like that, but even if you're within your value system, it helps us to have a better understanding and a better relationship with our sexuality. So even if your religion dictates a certain thing and you're within those guidelines, a lot of people still struggle with sexuality, even in partnership where they feel safe. It's hard to unwind some of the trauma or the cultural conditioning that they've adopted about sexuality. So that's what
right. So I know when we were sort of talking and preparing for today and what we would talk about, there were some books that you recommended we have, and I will put those books up at the end of this. But there was one book that I had started reading, and it called, the body. What is it called? Let me just make sure right. The Body Keeps the Score. Yeah. Which just the title of that book was so revealing to just think about the fact that, yes, even though we experience some things and in our mind we can maybe push those experiences down to a very subconscious level, but your body doesn't, right? Your body continues to keep the score of trauma to your body and also generational trauma, right? So the trauma that your mom experienced, the trauma that your grandmother experienced or grandparents, just intergenerational, multi-generational trauma. Can you talk a little bit about like what that theory is and how it relates to issues around intimacy and relationships?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a few different theories around it. The way that I like to look at it is we pass down our behaviors from parent to child. So if you grow up in a household where there's a lot of arguing or a lot of abuse or something like that, you're more likely to repeat that. And you're more likely to be comfortable with violence in the home. So, those kinds of things get repeated. And we've seen studies like the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that kids that grow up in homes where there's mental illness or abuse or alcohol or drug use or, a lot of instability in the home have a higher risk of physical illness. So they have a higher risk of diseases developing because of those kinds of events in the home. So we see the same sort of thing with generational sexual abuse. And any Black person has a history of sexual abuse because slavery, 450 years, there was horrific things going on. And we don't even want to go into all the things that our ancestors witnessed as far as sexual abuse and trauma, but that got passed down from generation to generation. So, there can be that wounding that's passed on, and we don't know exactly all the ways that it gets passed down. But one thing that is taught is that epigenetically, so the way that our genes get expressed is actually passed down from parent to child, and some of the stress hormone genes and those kinds of things can be up-leveled. So if your parent was in a stressful situation, you tend to be on high alert for violence and for threats because of a parent. So even if you're in a safe environment, you're continuously scanning for danger. Or you may go the other extreme where there may be danger present, but you don't even register it as danger. So you're not even taking care of yourself because your body is so used to being in a situation of high danger. So we see some of that with what's going on with the coronavirus epidemic or pandemic, that people, even though they know intellectually that going in certain spaces and not protecting themselves could potentially cause them to acquire the virus and die, they just don't protect themselves. And it probably is some of that they just don't have the self-protection mechanisms in place because they were, they grew up in environments where there was a lot of violence or hostility. And so they don't even have the wherewithal to protect themselves. And we see that with sexuality as well, is that people take greater risks, both, with substance use, with alcohol and drug use, your guard goes down. So you may make choices that you wouldn't make sober. But also, if you're, raised in an environment where there's a lot of violence or you have a history of abuse, you may not take the precautions to prevent STDs, to prevent pregnancy, and to prevent COVID now. You may go out and hook up with somebody who hasn't been under quarantine and then bring that exposure back to your own family, and not wanting to do that, but you may make poor choices just because you don't have the same ability to protect yourself because of generational trauma. So that's something that's
I mean, that is all so fascinating, and to think about, it makes a lot of sense, right? I heard it explained, which I really liked. I heard it explained that it's like your family plays a particular song on a piano, right? And the song that the keys that are used in your family to play that song, if you play that song over and over, then those keys sort of get ingrained into your DNA and passed down to you. So while you can relearn how to play a different song or learn how to play other songs, the songs that feel comfortable to you are the ones that the songs of the keys that your family has been playing for generations. And if you think about that in terms of health, and in terms of risk taking and sexual abuse, all of those things factor into our DNA. And it is, in fact, expressed in some way or another. And we really are starting this whole theory of epigenetics and really trying to open wide really how it works and what is passed down. So it's really interesting to also think about body trauma or sexual trauma being passed on from generations starting, when we were enslaved. Joyce DeGruy, in her book, the post-traumatic slave syndrome, she talks about that body trauma and how that is passed into generations. So how do you then start to unpeel that and start to work so that you can become a healthier person in terms of your relationships and intimacy? What types of tools do you give your patients?
Yeah. The first thing is really just becoming aware of it. Some of us are not even aware of that running in our background as what's driving our behavior. We may know that we keep on partnering with the same kind of partner that doesn't treat us well, and that we have poor boundaries, and we may have high self-esteem in certain areas, like for instance in our career, but then when it comes to relating, we may keep choosing the same sorts of partners that don't respect us and those kinds of things. So just being aware that there may be some generational stuff going on there that's leading to behaviors that are not serving us. But then really I work with clients to figure out what they want, so I'm not here to tell anybody what they want, but if they're in a relationship and they're having a hard time relaxing during sex, we try to investigate what kinds of thoughts are coming in, what kind of sensations in the body happen when they're trying to relax and become sexual. Sometimes it'll be like a constriction in the throat or tightness in the chest, and then we really go in and try to figure out what that is from, or what it's there to do. And it really is a protective mechanism that's in the body that many times the body is trying to protect you from something, and it just hasn't updated the story. So if there was something going on when you were 6 years old, when you're 36, you may not have gotten the update in your body, even though your mind knows that you're in a safe situation. So you can unwind that trauma from the body using a bunch of different tools. Some of the most powerful tools to get into the subconscious where this trauma is held is things like breath work. So if you breathe in certain patterns, you can actually relax the part of your mind that the thinking part of the mind, the cerebral cortex, not goes to sleep completely, but just it gets out of the way so you can get into the subconscious and reprogram beliefs to ones that serve you better. I prescribe things like movement therapy. One of the things that happens when we're under stress, if you think of fight or flight, when you're under stress, people also sometimes freeze. So if you're in a situation where you don't think you can survive, you tend to just tighten up and, hold on for impact kind of thing. Right. So what happens in people's body when they're in sexual situations that stress them out, sometimes they just go into freeze. And so even if it's a situation where you're not really wanting sex, but you just don't feel the capacity to be able to stop somebody. So it may not even be a matter of non-consent. It's just that you didn't have the wherewithal to speak up. And a lot of people go through that they feel like they betrayed their own body because they didn't want to go through with something, but they felt pressured and just couldn't even speak up. They almost go mute and they can't even, push somebody off. So just going into those kinds of things and unwinding them with movement therapy, and in shaking practices, there's a lot of different movement therapies that you can do. Some of the practices are actually really nice, and something that our bodies naturally will do is things like rocking. You see old people in a rocking chair or kids kind of rocking themselves. Those are soothing behaviors that can actually unwind trauma from the body. Shaking, dance, those kinds of things will help to unwind trauma. Just focusing on the sensations in the body and then breathing through them can actually help to unwind them quite a bit. So it's a step-by-step process. And with trauma, one of the things that causes trauma is things that happen in the body too fast. So the dictum with trauma is too soon, too fast, too much. And if you go in and try to heal things too fast, sometimes people will go into shutdown. So you have to go really, really gingerly or really, really carefully into some of these traumas that have been long held. It's almost like an excavation, when they have that little brush and they're just kind of gently peeling back the layers. So that's kind of the process, is that you just have to be really careful and tender with these traumas to be able to heal them. So.
Yeah, but it sounds like it starts with awareness, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. All right. I want to remind people who are watching that if you have a question for Dr. Renee, to go ahead and put it in the chat in the comment section, and we can ask Dr. Renee your questions. So I want to switch up a little bit because we're talking about kind of undoing some trauma. And, my show is really about building health and wellness. So I want to start on the flip side of how do you teach your young daughters, young adults, or even yourself maybe, like what are some of the, you were a health educator before, a sex ed educator before you were a doctor. How do we kind of start having those conversations with our teens and our daughters to help prevent the body shaming and the sex shaming that can happen? Do you have any thoughts about it or suggestions for, parents and guardians?
Yeah. So one thing that is really useful is watching the way that you talk to yourself. So as a mother, many times women shame their own bodies. They're like, oh gosh, I put all this weight on, I'm disgusting, and they don't even realize that their young daughters are listening to all that and taking that in. And really placing a woman's value on her appearance rather than the whole of herself, and that is something that's very damaging to young girls. So just being mindful of that and not complimenting girls just on their looks, but complimenting on their personalities and their accomplishments and all that kind of stuff too is really important. Another thing is just making this as normal as possible, which is hard because we're in a culture that is sex negative. We have so many sexual images out there and so much on the internet about sex, but most people have a pretty negative view on sex, especially for women. So women are labeled as bad or dirty or shameful because they're sexual or openly or whatever. And just watching that dialogue with kids present is really important. I remember when I was a little kid and we would be walking around and see a woman that was dressed kind of, provocatively, and my mom would kind of look at her and be like, and I took that on, I really heard that. And the message to me was like, it's not okay to be dressed, with your, body hugging clothes or whatever. And it wasn't necessarily I would have made those choices, but I really got the message that is wrong, that is bad, that's shameful, that woman is terrible. And she wasn't doing anything, just walking down the street. And my mom, just had a certain feeling about her own body probably. And so, there may have been some jealousy there or whatever, right. But I really took it on that it's not okay to show any cleavage or to wear a fitted skirt or high heels or whatever. And so just being mindful of those kinds of things. And the way we talk so freely and openly and judge other women. Women are probably worse with other women than men are, talking about, oh, she gained some weight, she don't need to be wearing that, and all that stuff. But just being cautious about that. And then, just the opening the door so that if they have questions, they can come to you instead of, everybody's going to be a little bit uncomfortable when their daughter approaches them talking about sex, but just get enough education yourself and start to get more comfortable yourself so that when that does happen eventually that you can, and your sons too, but just start talking about it openly and leave the door open because it's not going to be one conversation. Most of us got 0 or 1 conversation about sex, but to have the door open so that as they grow up and they have more questions that they can come to you first. And the choices are either they come to you or they get their information from their friends on the internet. And which one sounds more dangerous to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So. Yeah, I have had so many of my teenage patients come in and ask questions about certain things that I know they had to hear it from someone older because it's not a phrase that's used in their era, their generation. And so that they're picking up bits and pieces of conversations from older people, and they're trying to put it together, but no one is helping them to really connect the dots. And I think as Black people, we're very conservative when it comes to sex. And, I laugh about what my mom's sex education was for me, was just like, keep your legs closed. Like, that was sex education. Keep your legs closed and nothing can happen. It's like, okay. Well, what happens if I don't keep my legs closed? So we really need to really be open and talk a lot more freely about sex to our young girls. And like you said, because if we don't teach them, then they're going to learn from their friends, or they're going to learn from someone older who could be a potential predator coming to our young children, or they'll get on the internet. You know, it's so easy to get on the internet. So we have to do a better job, ladies and gentlemen out there, of talking openly about sex and educating our kids, giving them your own value system, but educating them about what it means to have sex. All right, so I'm looking in the chat. Lots of people want to compliment other black women. That's great. So I was doing, one of the other books that we talked about was My Grandmother's Hands, right? By Resma, I want to mess up his last name, but Menachem, is that how you say it?
I think it's Menachem, yeah.
Yeah, Menachem.
It's a beautiful book, and that is actually a much easier read than The Body Keeps the Score. The Body Keeps the Score is very informative, but it's a hard read because it goes deep into childhood trauma, which I had to put it down several times just because it was so painful for me to read it in one sitting.
Yeah.
But My Grandmother's Hands is a beautiful book. It talks about racial trauma and how it's held in the body. It goes into a lot of the stuff about, what The Body Keeps the Score is about. But it also talks about how to release that trauma. So, he prescribes different practices at the end of the chapters as far as movement practices, sounding practices, singing, humming, those kinds of things that can help to unwind trauma. So it's beautiful, yeah. Yeah,
there was something that he said that I thought was super cool. And when he said that, a lot of, going back to sort of this generational trauma, that a lot of it, like you said, you tense up, and some of that is protective, but you're in a situation where you're no longer needing to be protected, but you still have that instinct. He said that protection out of context becomes over time what's considered your culture.
Right, exactly.
And I thought, wow, that's, when you think about black culture and you think about so many different things that we do within our culture, that a lot of it is protective, but it's now out of context because we're no longer dealing with the same need to protect ourselves in the same way. What are your thoughts about that statement?
Yeah, for sure. And I've thought a lot about this, that, as I roam through the world, I'll see people who you can tell they're uncomfortable in a situation, it may be an unfamiliar situation, and then the slightest, word from somebody can send them into this anger. They're really quick to anger. Yeah. And that seems like culture for us. There's certain people that just flip at, the drop of a dime. And a lot of that is generational trauma that they're still holding. And we can even take it out on our partners, like, why are you always starting something, that kind of thing, because they tend to be uncomfortable in unfamiliar situations, and then they get angry if somebody looks at them a certain way. But it's not culture. It's just a traumatized, person will react strongly to something that's not even a real threat. It could be just something somebody says, or they didn't like the way somebody said something or looked at them a certain way, and then all of a sudden they're ready to fight, but they've gone into fight or flight. The best thing that you can do in that situation, if you recognize it in somebody, is to just get centered and grounded yourself, because a centered, grounded nervous system can help to regulate somebody else. But if you jump in there with them as though the threat were real, or if you start to fight them, then that's when things start to escalate, and that can be, disastrous.
Right. I want to go back to sort of this healing process, right? Because we want to heal from our, generational trauma. We want to heal from our own body trauma. We want to be able to heal and develop relationships and intimacy with our partners. And you talked about some of the methods. What do you think about, like, meditation? How does meditation, work in these types of issues?
Yeah. So meditation is wonderful. For one thing, it quiets the mind. So if you can get it into a space where you still the mind, and it doesn't have to be necessarily seated meditation. I do a variety of different meditations. I'll either go for a walk and really try to stay present in my body as I'm walking. go into nature and just take in nature in all 5 of my senses. I try to feel the sun on my skin. I feel the breeze. I, listen to the birds. I hear the breeze through the trees. And just being present like that actually can help to heal trauma in your body. And that's one of the practices that I do for people. One thing that people complain about with meditation is that it's so hard to sit still for long periods of time. Start with the short, the first time you sit down to meditate, you may only be able to accomplish like 2 still minutes, because many of us with trauma have a very hyper nervous system where we feel like we have to stay busy all the time, busy. And one of the things that you can actually do to heal trauma is to try to slow your pace. So try to not to overcommit yourself. And that's something that has been passed down generationally too, is that, slaves didn't rest. They worked 365 days a year. So a lot of us have a hard time stilling ourselves. We have a hard time slowing down, resting. We're almost allergic to rest. We're something's wrong here.
You're talking about me, Dr. Renee.
But a couple hundred years ago, you would have died if you rested. So it makes sense that we were taught that rest is not good, but rest is necessary, and that's how your body recovers. And keeping at that high pace all the time, you're just burning yourself out. You're secreting way too many stress hormones, and we weren't supposed to go all year round like that. We have seasons for a reason. You're supposed to slow down during certain seasons, but our modern lives have made it so that we can go all the time, but it's not healthy for us. So even just 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day to be able to still yourself, still your mind. And some people like having a background noise, like a humming noise, or, like the air conditioning or something like that, going just to concentrate on something that's kind of nothingness. They have apps that you can download that have just kind of white noise in the background that you can focus on, or the old school thing is to repeat mantras like Om or something like that. But even if you can just accomplish 2 minutes of mental stillness, you're doing better than most.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I think for those of you out there who have Kaiser insurance, I got an email today that said Kaiser is giving a free subscription to the Calm app.
Oh,
which
beautiful.
is really
That's
nice. So you can download that onto your phone and do some meditation periodically.
That's great.
All right, let's see. A couple of questions have come up, Dr. Renee. So this is a good question because we always talk about the role of mothers in sex education. So we have a gentleman out here who asked, what role can fathers play in talking to their daughters about sex?
Yeah, I think fathers have a really unique perspective for girls. Young girls really get the messaging that sex is about enticing men. You see all the images that go around. They get something like 1,700 images a day on social media and the internet. So most of those are sexual, and then it's about like having the perfect selfie and having a lot of cleavage showing and having your butt showing, all this stuff. But to give the message to if fathers can give the message to daughters that they're valuable for something other than their sexuality and something other than their body like that, and to really respect themselves and value themselves, and that a man, person that they want to date is not going to leave because they don't give them sex. So I'm not saying never give them sex, but waiting until they're ready to, instead of rushing themselves because they think the guy's going to leave or go somewhere else. And if the guy is going to go somewhere else because they don't give them sex right away, then they're free to leave. Take care. But if I had gotten that message from my dad really early on, I think it would have been very powerful. Just to be more discerning with dating and to really have strict boundaries with dating. Like, this is, if somebody ghosts me or doesn't call me back, you're not welcome to pop back up in my, in my inbox in 3 weeks without having contact. It's not welcome. I would have been better off with dating if I had really good education from my father around dating and stuff. So I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's a great question because fathers do play a really significant role in how girls shape relationships, right? And and how they think of themselves and how they find value. So, you know, for fathers out there who might be watching, make sure you tell your daughter how smart she is and how kind she is and how, you know, wise she is, not just how pretty she is. Because sometimes, you know, beauty fades or accidents happen. I mean, you never know. And if something happens to their body or face as they are, then how do they then still consider themselves beautiful if it's only because of what they look like now? Yeah. So great question. Also had a question about yoga. Is that a good practice to help with these issues?
For sure, yeah. So all movement therapies, including yoga, and yoga is great. There's a lot of research that's been done on post-traumatic stress disorder and yoga as far as one of the best therapies for healing that. So I really advocate doing yoga and stretching to help to unwind a lot of trauma.
Yes. Any particular type of yoga? I think this is Bikram yoga, which is like hothouse yoga, but any particular type of yoga?
Yeah, all of them are actually really helpful, and even for myself, I don't generally dedicate like a full hour to doing yoga, but I'll do a few stretches because I used to do it, so I remember some of the stretches. So I'll do a few stretches, and it really is helpful for me.
I agree. I love to do Windsor Pilates yoga, and even though I don't do the full workout, just doing a couple of the moves, you know, just and breathing and stretching really helps to just relax me, even if I'm not doing the full exercise.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. Let's see. Any other questions that I don't want to make sure that I don't miss it? Okay, great. I want to go something in your bio that we didn't actually get to talk about, and that was a bit of your own personal journey, where you said in your bio that you know the effects of cultural conditioning on sexuality. We talked a little bit about that early on, but I want to see if you maybe want to touch on it a little bit of how you have been, you know, in some ways where your clients are when they come to you.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much the cultural conditioning affected me until I started to unwind some of it. But the things I noticed in my own self was that it was hard for me to completely surrender. So, you know, I would kind of be in my mind a lot during sex. So it was hard for me to get out of my mind and into my body. And I also was continuously trying to make sure that my partner was having a good time instead of thinking about how my body felt, you know. So I was disconnected from the pleasure in my own body because I was concerned with the person having a good time, and that took me out of the experience, you know. So it wasn't as pleasurable as it could have been to me. But the other thing was that good girl narrative, you know. So I was a good student and you know, went to med school and all that stuff. So there was this whole good girls don't. So any sex that I had, and I was pretty late starting, but there was some shame around it. And so, you know, it wasn't like even with people that I was dating, and, you know, it just felt like it was a shameful thing to be doing. And, you know, I probably wouldn't have said that at the time, but there was some, you know, tension in my system because I felt like I was doing something wrong, even when I was 25 or 35, because, you know, just the cultural conditioning that you're supposed to wait till you get married, or you're supposed to be with the, you know, long-term committed partner. And, you know, if I was dating somebody for a few weeks, it just felt like I was doing something wrong. And I really had to take a long time to get that out of my system because it just felt like I was carrying around all this shame. And I realized that, like, the culture makes sex shameful for women in a way that it doesn't do for men. You know, so if it's the same activity and there are two people there, and, you know, assuming that it's a man and a woman, it may not be, but why is it that the woman holds the shame? What did she do? You know, it's like he may have suggested it, and then she takes the shame on, and I'm trying to unwind that for people so that they can release that, so they can actually have pleasure in it. And even people, they've been married years and they still have that shame that they're holding on to from, you know, either early in their relationship or even before their current relationship, that, you know, they may have made choices that they're not happy about. Even with childhood sexual abuse, the children a lot of times take on shame when it's not their shame to hold.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't do anything wrong. In fact, I don't think shame is a real useful emotion in general.
Right.
You know, if you did something wrong, you should have remorse. And if you didn't do anything wrong, what are you ashamed of? And the same thing for slavery. You know, a lot of Black people walk around with this shame about being Black. What did we do wrong? We didn't do anything wrong. We just, you know, this is the way my genes express. And I didn't, you know, why did we take on so much shame around it? And unwinding it in both areas has been really liberating for me. It felt like taking off a 50-pound backpack just to unwind the shame of, you know, of both cultures, you know, being a woman and being a Black person on the planet. There's so much shame around both of those things, and it doesn't need to be so.
Yeah. And there's no, you know, no shortage of experiences, right? And as being a woman, as being a Black woman, and all of the types of stereotypical words and images around sexuality for Black women. And how it's really not most of us, because we're raised extremely conservative.
Exactly.
But yet that's the image that's placed on us as Black women. And sometimes, you know, I can recall, you know, when I was younger and just, you know, walking down the street, like, you know, I'm talking like in my teenage years, walking down the street and having adult men, you know, white men looking at me. And instead of feeling like something was wrong with them, I can recall feeling like the shame, like there was something wrong with me, right? And so we have a lot to unpack as women, and Black women in particular.
Yeah, and Black girls are hypersexualized earlier.
Yeah.
So, you know, you could be 8 or 9 years old, and then, you know, grown men, like 40-year-old men, are looking at you and commenting on your body. We develop on average about a year earlier. I was 9 when I got my period, so I had breasts, and white boys were like pulling at my bra and, you know, doing all, you know, groping me at 9, 10. And you think there's something wrong with you. It's like I must have worn a shirt that was too tight. You know, I was 9. I didn't have a whole lot of choices in my fashion at the time. Just playing. I was riding my bike, but you get unwanted attention at that age, and you take it on as there's something wrong with me. A lot of girls will gain a lot of weight at that age because they're trying to cover up their body and not be, you know, exposed, you know, their breasts. And family members will say things. So older brothers, uncles will start saying things about your body that are unwelcome. And even in this day and age, there's a lot of unwelcome touching for women. Even, you know, in my experience, I had a pretty good upbringing. You know, like, I'm an educated woman. If I added up the number of times I've been inappropriately touched through my lifetime, I would run out of paper, I think. I mean, it's just, it's so prevalent, you know, and it's disgusting that we're still living that. Or just inappropriate comments, or people thinking that you're obligated to do something because you're a woman. You know, I had a man at a resort. I was there with a boyfriend. This older white man just grabbed my arm and was like, "Come with me." And I was like, "I don't think so." I acted like I was supposed to just comply with his wishes because he was a white man. And I was like, this is crazy. Yeah. But, you know, you have those things hit your body, and you'll store that unless you shake it off, you know, so you have to go through practices that you discharge that stuff, or else you just have a whole lifetime of these events, you know, just kind of held in your system. And that's why, you know, we have so much anxiety and depression and, you know, all sorts of back pain, all sorts of things that, that go in our systems that we don't even know why sometimes. There's even theories about fibroids that, you know, in America, African American people have more fibroids than women in Africa. So we don't know if possibly holding a lot of stress and tension in the pelvis from the trauma, you know, the sexual trauma that happened generationally is causing some of that. We don't know, you know, it could be a bunch of different factors, but that's possible.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think like this conversation when you and I were talking before the show, and we were just kind of talking about this topic, and I just was kind of peeling back layers just even for myself that I had never thought about. I had never thought about those experiences that I had as a teenage girl walking down the street in a predominantly white area and having predominantly white friends, and all of the comments and conversations and inappropriate touching and unwanted advances, like that started so young. And here I am, some years later, thinking about that and realizing how it's added up. And I think like the one thing, if I can take away anything, if I want people to realize, is just the awareness of it, right? That is the first step of us just being aware of all of the trauma that we are holding on to. And if you have been, molested as a child, abused as a child, that's added stress and trauma. And that if you're not dealing with it in an outright way, that your body can be dealing with it in terms of causing disease, which then leads to disease. So, this has just been eye-opening for me. Lots of questions for you, like how do they reach you? Do you do couples? What's the best way to reach you? So I'm going to give you an opportunity to give people your contact information and what's the best way to reach out to you if they, want to have you as their doctor and as their coach.
Yeah. So I've actually closed my gynecology practice, and we're doing the somatic
full time.
Coaching.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So if you go to ReneeHillard.com, that's my website, and it has more information about the somatic coaching. And then there's a place where you can set up a free consultation just to get to know what issues are going on, to see if it's something I can help you with. So, they're free to do that.
Spell your name, Renee. Your full name.
Yeah, so it's ReneeHillard.
Yes.
.com. So.
Perfect. So ReneeHillard.com, and you can sign up and a free consultation. That's awesome.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to mention is that with sexual abuse, we go through more sexual abuse in the Black community, but much less reporting and much less therapy around it, because sometimes it's not believed. Girls will report it to caregivers or authority figures, and either it's not believed or there's this whole feeling like, oh, we're going to destroy the family if we bring that up, or bring shame on the family, so we can't do anything about it. And then that gets stored in that girl, and as they grow, a lot of times it doesn't occur to them that they still need to work through that trauma and release that trauma. And so they may think they're functioning okay as an adult, but in the background that's still operating in there. And so it really is important to go and release it.
Right. Dr. Renee, this was eye-opening. Thank you so much for coming on my show. I am sure that I'll have you back for some other topics. But I'm going to give you, final say, anything that you want to bring up that we didn't mention, something you want to make sure to let people know about.
Yeah. Well, thanks, first of all, for having me on the show. This has been wonderful. And I love getting these messages out because I think they're so needed. But really the take home for me is just that sex doesn't need to be shamed. It's a normal thing. Like I said, all of us are here because of sex. If it weren't for our ancestors having sex, we wouldn't be on the planet. And any other body process is not shamed in the way that sexuality is shamed. And it doesn't mean that we're encouraging people to go, be promiscuous or anything like that. But if you don't have the education, the proper education to protect yourself, you're at risk. And kids are put in a position where they're having to come up with answers for themselves. And they don't have they don't have good resources to go to for them. So, if you leave that out of educating a child, they're going to make up their own answer, and they're much safer and in better hands if you create the story for them. So.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Renee. I'm going to put up a slide to show the books that we talked about so that you can either screenshot it or take a picture. It's 3 of the books that Dr. Renee suggested. A couple of them I've started reading but haven't necessarily finished because The Body Keeps the Score is a deep book. So if, there's 3 books that we mentioned. They should be up now. These are books just for you to just think about reading, but it gives a lot more information about healing body trauma. My Grandmother's Hands, the author, he talks about how we have to heal from body trauma and how white skin supremacy and how that acts as a traumatic for our bodies. And then that interferes with our ability to have intimate and loving relationships. The post-traumatic slave syndrome has a lot of talking about taking the multi-generational trauma that started when we were enslaved and how some of that has built upon our bodies. This is just great reading for you to do to help in your awareness, to help you to talk to the women and the men in your life. Because we want people, a part of being healthy is to be healthy mind, body, and spirit. And so as we build generational health, we also want to build a healthy conversations and healthy habits. And sexuality and sex is a part of building healthy habits. If you have sexual experiences that lead to an infection early on, that can then, when you're older and ready to have children, that can impact your ability to even be fertile and have children. So it's important to talk about sex. It's important to know how to have these conversations with your young daughters and your sons about building healthy relationships and building intimacy and having fulfilling sexual lives. So thank you for watching. Again, this is Talking with Dr. Donna. You have an appointment with your doctor every Thursday at 6 p.m. So thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we will see you again next week. Take care. Thanks again, Dr. Renee.
Thank you.
Great seeing you. You look great in your red. If you have a question for Dr. Donna, please do leave it on my page and I will be happy to answer the question for you.